The Teams connector deployment and upgrade process uses a blue-green deployment strategy. The approach allows you to create separate Teams connectors where one connector is in production, and the other is available and on standby. This means that you can test both connectors separately, and switch between them. Each connector is deployed initially using the same version, the blue connector being the production connector, and the green connector available for testing. The approach allows the green connector to be upgraded to a later version and tested without impacting on the production Pexip Teams CVI service. The approach is fully documented online at docs.pexip.com and should be used for reference when deploying in this manner. Please note that processes and procedures can change between versions. This video series is based on version 35. The benefits of using the blue-green process are as follows. It provides a non-destructive upgrade path. The existing connector remains in production until the upgraded connector is fully functional and validated. There's an increase in service availability during the upgrade process as the production connector remains online. An upgrade can be done during business hours when access to required service administrators, or owners, are more readily available before a planned switchover window. There is reduced time pressure and risk if there are problems or delays in completing the deployment. For example, cloud resources not being available, permissions issues, network access issues. If any of these issues prevent deployment, then they can be resolved, and connector deployment attempted at a later date and time. The overall deployment risk is reduced by simplifying the rollback process if a deployment fails. The main difference between the blue-green deployment and upgrade strategy compared to a legacy single connector deployment is that you deploy two Teams connectors and switch between them as you upgrade from one version of Teams connector software to the next. Once the test connector is successfully deployed and running the updated software version, Infinity can then be upgraded and configured to use the newly deployed connector in production. Following successful validation of the CVI service via the upgraded connector, the other connector could be powered off to save costs. The first connector, blue, is deployed in a similar fashion to a regular Teams connector deployment. You do not need to create a new CVI app or perform any additional app authorizations when deploying the second connector, green. Only one CVI app registration is required per tenant. However, a new API app is required for each deployment. Each connector requires a unique FQDN and TLS certificate. A DNS record is required for each connector. Some of the variables in the variables script are of particular relevance as they are used to differentiate between the two deployments. PEX VMSS region is used to identify the connector. PEX Teams Con FQDN is the FQDN of the specific connector. Teams Connector API Application ID. Each connector must have its own API App ID. PEX Existing VNet Resource ID. If you are using private routing, each deployment must use its own non-overlapping VNet. This video series focuses on the blue-green deployment method and assumes the viewer is familiar with Teams Connector deployment in general. It will show a simple greenfield deployment where there are no existing Teams connectors in use. Both the production, blue, and test, green, deployments are deployed with version 35, as this is the latest version available at the time of recording. Typically, the test deployment would be a later version. The Pexip documentation is the single source of truth and should be used as your reference point for any deployments. Remember to use the documentation version relevant to the version being deployed.